She held the cloth with trembling hands, smelling the strong smell of cleaning products mixed with the expensive perfume that permeated every wall of this mansion in Boston. The marble shone, the carpets were soft as clouds, but to her, everything sounded distant, as if she were walking inside a museum where she was not welcome. The sound of the old clock echoed in the library, each ticking reminding him that his presence there was only tolerated. No one noticed her, but she saw everything. Linda Moretti, 29, the daughter of Italian immigrants, had left behind her dream of teaching music. She carried on her shoulders the weight of a sick mother and the debts that never stopped growing. Now, hidden under the uniform of a cleaner, she kept a secret. Her voice, trained since she was a girl, capable of moving hearts. How many women have gone through this? Buried talents, silenced by fate, invisible inside the homes where they work. In that huge room, surrounded by bookshelves that touched the ceiling, she found the boy no one else expected to hear. Michael, 8 years old, motionless in his wheelchair, carried an emptiness of pain in his eyes. Since the accident that took his mother, he had not said a word. The silence of the house was heavy, almost cruel, but one day that silence would be broken. And when it was, nothing would be the same as before. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. There was a moment hidden between walls of glass and silence when a simple cleaning lady dared to sing softly, only to herself. And what happened next was so improbable that it seemed impossible. Linda's voice, sweet and laden with Italian memories, pierced the heavy air of the library. And before her, a boy who had not spoken for 2 years raised his head, his eyes teary, and let out an almost sacred word. That was the moment when the Whitmore family's fate split in two, but the price of truth was yet to come. And if you already feel your heart tighten, just imagining this scene, I ask you to stay with me, because this story is not only of Linda and Michael, it is also a mirror of our own pain, of the silences we carry, and of the voices that could never be heard. If this story touches you, if the injustice and courage hidden in simple gestures make sense, leave your support with a like and subscribe to this channel, not as an obligation, but as a silent hug to the protagonist of this journey and to all the invisible people who once had their voice erased. The Whitmore mansion stood on Beacon Hill like a palace of glass and stone, towering against the grey Boston sky. Its iron gates never opened to strangers, and inside there reigned a silence that was not only the absence of sound, but a suffocating presence. Each corridor was too wide, each thick carpet muffled footsteps, each chandelier seemed to glow to cover an invisible pain. There was no shortage of money, but the air was impregnated with something that not even expensive fragrances could hide: mourning and loneliness. Linda walked through the corridors, still not believing that she was now part of that invisible routine. Simple uniform, hair tied in a bun, bucket in hand. She was just one shadow among many, just like the maids who changed the sheets without being noticed, the gardeners who kept the grass impeccable without ever crossing eyes with the owner of the house. Everything worked like a clock, and that clock had a guardian, Margaret Collins, the housekeeper. Margaret was not only chief of staff, she was the true owner of the rhythm of the mansion. Tall, rigid posture, cold eyes, always in a dark dress, she spoke with short and sharp sentences. There was no smile on his lips, only orders. She was the one who decided who could talk to the boy, who could or would not enter the library, who would touch the porcelain crockery brought from France. Everyone obeyed without question, and Linda soon learned that every extra word there was a threat to her job. Michael, the son of billionaire Richard Whitmore, lived in a room that looked more like a museum than a children's space. Expensive toys remained untouched, covered in a thin layer of dust, and the lined shelves displayed books that no one read. The boy, only 8 years old, spent his days in his wheelchair, staring at a distant point, as if trying to find in the void some memory of the mother he had lost. Richard, the father, was rarely home. Always traveling, always in meetings, always at business dinners. A widower, he had immersed himself in commitment so as not to face the pain. It was easier for him to delegate. And Margaret was there to take on that role. She took care of Michael, as if she were managing a property, but without affection, only with discipline. It was in this environment that Linda first entered the library. The room was grandiose, with tall windows covered with heavy curtains and shelves that reached the ceiling. The smell of old wood, mixed with the faint smell of forgotten books, hung in the air. In the center was Michael, motionless in his chair. He didn't turn around, he didn't show curiosity, he didn't move a muscle in his face when Linda entered. To him, it seemed that there was no difference between an extra maid or a piece of furniture. Linda felt her heart tighten. I wanted to say something, but the words died before they left. The silence was not only his, it was from the whole house, a silence that suffocated even my breath. She moped the furniture, cleaned the windows, organized the books. Each gesture made with care, but also with a delicacy that was only hers. Even invisible, even ignored, Linda made every move, as if it deserved to be noticed. It was his silent way of resisting contempt. As he worked, the door suddenly opened. Margaret entered, steady steps, steely gaze. He observed the scene, measured Linda from head to toe. "Don't get in the way of the boy," he said dryly. "He doesn't need distractions." Linda just lowered her head. He had quickly learned that, in order to survive there, it was necessary to speak little and obey. But inside her something stirred. How could they call the simple act of addressing a child a distraction? Time passed slowly in the mansion. Equal days and nights, clocks ticking the hours without anything changing. Michael remained silent. The wheelchair was his prison, and the library his gilded captivity. Linda watched without being able to act, but every time she saw the boy's empty eyes, she felt a pain that was not only his. It was on one of those afternoons, when the rain was pounding against the windows, that Linda realized the true weight of that silence. The sound of water running down the windows contrasted with the emptiness of the room. She paused for a moment, the cloth between her fingers, and looked at the boy. So small, so fragile, and already condemned to be just a shadow in a house full of luxury. At that moment a thought crossed her like a whisper. How many people have been silenced like this, trapped in pain that no one dared to see? How many men and women, in silence, have learned to live with the absence of love? Linda took a deep breath, feeling a truth burning in her chest. Silence can kill more than any disease. If this also touches you, leave a comment. Write, "I believe, I've lived it, it touched me," or whatever you feel. Because stories like this don't just belong to Linda or Michael, they belong to everyone who was once invisible in their own home. The clock struck 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the metallic sound echoing through the walls. Margaret entered once more, this time bringing the tray of medicines. He gave them to the boy as if performing a mechanical ritual. Michael swallowed without resistance, his eyes getting lost in the void again. Linda, watching from afar, felt a lump in her throat. There was something wrong, but I could not yet understand what. While putting away her cleaning supplies, Linda had the strange feeling that she was witnessing a hidden truth. Something in that house was not sustained only by mourning. There were secrets buried under the silence, and she was beginning to wonder if she was prepared to discover them. Because deep down, a certainty was born in his heart. That boy was not lost. He had a voice, and somehow it needed to get out. But what would happen to Linda if she dared to break the order of the mansion? What was behind that silence so carefully maintained? Linda was pushing the cleaning cart down the long corridor when she felt her heart beat faster. The library door was ajar, and she knew the boy would be inside. For a moment he thought about passing straight by, pretending he hadn't seen, but the order was clear. Clean every corner, even the quietest. He pushed the door slowly, hearing the slight creak of the hinges, and entered. The library looked like a temple. The smell of waxed wood mixed with the old dust of the books, and the light that passed through the stained glass windows tinted the environment with golden and bluish tones. In the center, motionless in his chair, stood Michael. The delicate face, the big eyes, and lost somewhere beyond the shelves. He looked like a living statue, without expression, without reaction. Linda felt the urge to say something, but her tongue was heavy. He bent down to pick up the bucket, wet the cloth, and began to clean the table next to him. The cloth creaked against the wood, but Michael didn't look away from the void. Then, in an almost involuntary gesture, Linda blurted out a soft sentence. "It's pretty, isn't it? This window. It seems that heaven enters here." He waited for some reaction, but nothing came. The silence remained absolute, as if his words had been swallowed by the walls. She got a little closer, arranging some books lying on the floor, and risked another attempt. "My name is Linda. I'm just here to clean up, but if you want, I can hear you." The boy blinked once, only once, and then returned to the same distant state. It was enough for her to feel a spark of life inside, but before she could try again, Margaret's hard voice pierced the air. "You're here to work, not to bother the boy." Linda was startled, the cloth almost slipping out of her hands. He turned and found the housekeeper standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes of ice. "Sorry, Mrs. Collins. I didn't want to get in the way." The woman didn't answer, just walked up to Michael, adjusted the blanket over his legs, and gave Linda a look that felt like a silent warning. The message was clear. Don't overstep your place. Linda lowered her head, but inside she felt something move. As he continued to clean, he furtively looked at Michael, wishing to find a breach, a way through that invisible wall that held him back. The work was finished, but when she left the room, she took with her the image of the boy and the uncomfortable feeling that there was more to it than silence and pain. And deep in her heart, a question burned. What would happen if she dared to cross that forbidden line once again? The next morning, the library was plunged into silence again. Linda came in with her bucket and the products, as she did every day, but at that moment there was something different in the air. A restlessness that she herself could not explain. The light passed through the stained glass windows and created colored stains on the carpet, as if small fragments of rainbows had fallen there. In the corner, motionless, was Michael, his eyes fixed on nothing, as always. Linda took a deep breath, put the bucket on the floor, and walked over to the grand piano that occupied the center of the room. The surface was covered with fine dust, neglected for all the luxury of the house. He passed the cloth slowly over the dark top, and each movement seemed to awaken an old memory. Her fingers stopped on the keys, hesitant. No one was around. Margaret was not watching the room at that moment, and the boy remained in his stone silence. Then, with her heart racing, Linda blurted out a single note. The sound echoed clean and pure, as if it had gone through the walls to reach the depths of the soul. It was at that moment that a memory sprouted, her grandmother's voice singing to her when she was still a girl, on winter nights, when the cold beat against the windows of the small Italian house. Without realizing it, Linda began to hum softly, a soft melody, a lullaby that crossed generations. The words in Italian came out like prayer, delicate, intimate, almost a whisper. She didn't sing to be heard, but because she needed to let go of that stored pain. She needed to remind herself that there was still beauty in the world. And it was at that moment that something happened. From his chair, Michael blinked. It was not an involuntary movement, but repeated, fast, as if the music had touched a dormant part of him. Linda noticed and stopped immediately, her heart racing. The cloth slipped from her hands, fell to the floor, but she didn't even notice. He looked at the boy in silence, not daring to say anything. Michael didn't speak, he didn't move anymore, but his eyes were different, alive for a second, as if something had lit up inside. Linda felt a wave of heat go through her chest. He lowered his head and resumed cleaning, pretending normality. But inside, he was thrilled with what he had just witnessed. A reaction, albeit minimal, in a boy who everyone believed to be lost. As he rubbed the cloth on the piano, his mind kept repeating the same question. Was it possible that that song had reached the boy? When he finished, he left the library in silence, telling no one, guarding the secret as if it were a treasure. But within her a certainty began to be born. The power of her voice could break the wall of silence that imprisoned Michael. What would happen if she dared to sing again, now with all her soul? The rain was pouring heavy on Boston that afternoon, crashing against the library's stained glass windows as if to tear the house out of its eternal silence. The sound of water running down the window panes filled the empty spaces, and for the first time, Linda felt the courage to do what her heart had asked for from day one. She left the bucket against the corner, passed the cloth calmly over the piano, and when she found herself alone with the boy, closed her eyes. She took a deep breath and began to sing. The melody came out shaky at first, but soon took shape. Ninna nana, ninna oh. Her voice, loaded with memories of her grandmother, seemed to sow the air torn by the sound of the storm. The notes rose like prayers. Each word in Italian was a childhood memory, a piece of soul offered to that hard silence that imprisoned Michael. The boy, motionless in his chair, took a few seconds to react. But suddenly, he raised his head slightly. His previously extinguished eyes shone as if an ancient flame had been rekindled. Linda felt her hands sweat, almost let the cloth slip. His heart raced. She didn't dare to stop singing, even with her voice choked with emotion. And then it happened. Between one verse and another, she heard a fragile whisper, almost swallowed by the noise of the rain. A word in Italian, small but full of life. Maestra! Linda almost tripped backwards. He pressed the cloth to his chest, not believing it. The boy had spoken. After 2 years of silence, he had uttered a word. Not just any word, but maestra, teacher. As if he recognized in her the presence of something she had never had the courage to call out loud. She approached slowly, tears burning in her eyes. Michael blinked fast, breathed hard, as if the simple attempt to speak had taken all his energy. But there was light in his eyes. At that moment, Linda took a deep breath and felt a mixture of joy and fear. It was as if he carried in his arms a revelation too delicate to be exposed. She followed in silence, carrying that weight that no one saw. And if you're following this story right now, feeling touched by all this, leave a like and subscribe. It is the most beautiful way to show that this pain has not gone unnoticed, that this invisible cleaning lady and this lost boy are not alone. When Linda looked up, she realized that it wasn't just the two of them in that room anymore. At the door, standing there, was Richard Whitmore, the billionaire, watching the scene in absolute silence. Her eyes, accustomed to spreadsheets and meetings, trembled at the sight of her son muttering the first word in years. Behind him, like a poisonous shadow, was Margaret. The housekeeper stared at the scene with restrained fury, her lips hard, her chin held high as if she saw her own power slip through her fingers. Linda felt a chill down her spine. The miracle had just happened, but the feeling was not one of victory. It was that, from that moment on, nothing would be the same as before. Because if Michael had found his voice, someone in that house would lose theirs. And deep in her soul, Linda wondered who would be willing to pay the price for this awakening. The hallway seemed longer that night. Linda walked in silence, the soles of her shoes sliding over the polished marble, her heart beating too fast for her slender body. Margaret had called out to her in a dry tone, "Mr. Whitmore wants to talk to you. Now." The words still echoed in her head as she made her way down the hallway toward the office, a place off-limits to ordinary employees. As he pushed the heavy wooden door, he felt the air thicker, impregnated by the smell of leather and cigars. Richard was sitting behind a huge table, papers scattered, his gaze fixed on her as if evaluating an enigma. Beside her, standing like a soldier, Margaret watched with cold eyes, arms crossed, her chin raised in defiance. Linda lowered her head, her sweaty hands attached to the cloth she still held, as if that small object could give her courage. "I want to understand what happened today," Richard said, his voice deep, emotionless. "My son said 2 years, and he spoke a word. How? Linda took a deep breath, trying to find the words. She told in a low voice about the lullaby, about the memory of her grandmother, about the impulse to sing to the boy. He explained that there was no plan, just a spontaneous gesture, an attempt to offer something human to the void. But before she was done, Margaret interrupted her, cutting her sentences like knives. "Mr. Whitmore, it is evident what is happening here. This simple girl is taking advantage of Michael's fragility, chance, superstitions, emotional manipulations. None of this is real. It is dangerous to allow it to continue." Richard frowned, bringing his hand to his chin. He seemed torn between Margaret's coldness and the miracle he had witnessed. Linda remained silent, her eyes teary, but not daring to beg. He knew that any excess of emotion would be interpreted as weakness. Finally, Richard broke his silence. "Beautiful. I can't explain what I saw, but I know I saw my son react. This cannot be ignored. I want it to continue. Sing to him, but in secret. No one but the three of us should know." "Understood." Linda's heart jumped, but along with it came a huge weight. The promise to help the boy was both blessing and condemnation. Margaret gave him a look of hatred, and she understood at that moment that she was buying a silent war. The housekeeper would not allow her authority to be threatened by a cleaning lady. Linda left the office with heavy steps, the cloth still tucked between her fingers. The corridor now seemed narrower, the walls closing in around it. He carried a secret that could save the boy, but also destroy his future. He knew that every note he sang would be watched, every gesture observed, every look interpreted as a threat. Still, as she remembered Michael's bright eyes, she felt a new courage being born. Her voice might be the key, but how far was she willing to go to use it, and what would happen when the silence of the house began to be irreversibly broken? Linda lay down that night in her small room at the back of the mansion, but sleep did not come. The hard mattress and the narrow window did not bother so much as the memories that came back insistently, as if the song she had sung to Michael had opened a safe in her own memory. She looked up at the ceiling and let herself be carried away by the past, a past she was trying to bury under layers of silence and hard work. He had lived in New York, in a very different life from the current one. As a young woman, full of hope, she gave volunteer music lessons at a community school in the Bronx. The children were her greatest pride, small, attentive eyes, clumsy voices trying to follow the tones of the piano she strummed with affection. Among them were boys with learning disabilities, girls who came from broken homes, and some who had never had someone to believe in their talent. Linda believed in everyone. Everything seemed to be going well until the night of the annual presentation. The auditorium was packed with fathers, mothers, grandparents, and neighbors. Linda conducted the children's choir with a heart full of pride. But an accident changed everything. One of the reflectors at the top of the stage detached and fell. It did not affect any children, but the confusion that followed was great. One girl slipped, another fainted from fright, and the parents, in panic, blamed the school's lack of preparation. In the following days, the tragedy gained exaggerated proportions. Some parents accused Linda of being irresponsible, of putting their children at risk. "She makes them sing, but she doesn't know how to protect them," they said. It didn't matter that the problem had been technical, that she had been the first to run to help the children. The verdict was in. Linda was guilty. The school, under pressure, removed her from the position. Overnight, she went from being the beloved teacher to becoming the name whispered in the hallways as an example of failure. Linda carried this guilt to this day. He felt that somehow it was not just the reflector that had fallen, but his own life. She had lost her voice at the moment when she needed it most. Since then, she has hidden her talent as if it were a crime, taking refuge in simple jobs, away from the stage, away from the classrooms, away from the eyes that once admired her. Now, seeing Michael react to his song, the past came back like a knife. If she had failed before with so many children, would she have the right to try again? Would she be ready to carry the responsibility of awakening a boy whom the family itself seemed to have abandoned to silence? Fear gnawed at her, but a flame grew with it. As he watched the moonlight drip through the crack in the window, a phrase crossed his chest. Sometimes, the heaviest secrets we carry are precisely the keys that can free someone. And that's why you need to stay with me, because the most memorable moment of this story is still kept, waiting for the time to happen. She closed her eyes and saw the face of her grandmother, a strong woman who had taught her her first notes in Italian. "Music does not heal wounds, my girl," he said, "but it gives voice to pain so that it does not destroy us from within." Maybe that's what Michael needed. Maybe that's what she herself needed. A distant thunderclap brought her back to the present. The wind was blowing against the trees in the mansion's garden, and Linda felt that she was not only remembering, but being summoned. His life had not been in vain. Every loss, every injustice, every tear had brought her to that moment. Perhaps her destiny was not to be recognized as a teacher, but to be remembered as the woman who gave voice to those who no longer had the strength to speak. Still, the weight of secrecy was immense. If Margaret already hated her, what would she do when she realized that Linda was the bridge between Michael and the world? And Richard, torn between business and pain, would he be able to protect this discovery or hide behind his coldness? Linda's heart was beating fast. In the silence of her simple room, a question echoed mercilessly. How far would she be able to go so that that little voice would not be silenced again? The next afternoon, the rain had given way to a shy sun, which pierced the library's colorful stained glass windows and painted the floor in red and gold tones. Linda walked with silent steps, the dust cloth in her hands, pretending to be busy with the shelves. But deep down, his attention was on him, Michael sitting in his wheelchair, his gaze lost between the open pages of a book he didn't read. The silence was so thick that it felt like a weight on the air, and she knew there was only one way to try to break through that barrier. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and let the old melody emerge from within her. The song in Italian came out low, almost a whisper. Ninna, Nana, Ninna, oh. Michael looked up. There was something different, as if he were lurking for a forgotten sound. His lips quivered, and he stammered something incomplete. Linda held her breath. He repeated the stanza, clearer, and approached a little, without making a noise with his feet. It was then that he tried again, and this time the word came out firmer, almost entire, a childish repetition of the melody. Linda felt her heart race. It was like seeing a flower grow in the middle of a barren terrain. She knelt before him, keeping the cloth in her hands to disguise it, and continued singing. Michael, little by little, began to repeat entire passages, stumbling over the syllables, but insisting as if each word was a key opening closed doors in his mind. Linda felt her eyes teary, but she forced herself to smile because she knew he needed to see joy and not pity. "Bravo, Michael, brave," he murmured in Italian, and the boy smiled back, a shy but true smile that had not seemed to visit that face in years. With each word he risked, it seemed that the image of his mother came back closer. When she said "Mama" with her voice still fragile, Linda almost dropped the cloth. She understood at that moment. It wasn't just the music that made him speak. It was the memory that the music brought. That song was not just melody, it was a bridge between worlds, between the cold present of the mansion and the lost warmth of the mother's lap. And it is at this point that the heart tightens, because anyone who has ever lost someone knows all it takes is a song, a smell, or a gesture to reopen wounds and also restore hope. Perhaps you who are listening to this story have already felt this too, that memory that comes back with such force that it seems to make us live again. If you felt it, comment here. I understand. I've been through this. I was moved. Because these memories, painful and beautiful, are what unite us as human beings. Michael now looked at Linda with a different glow, as if he had finally seen her for real, Not the cleaning lady in a simple uniform, but someone who held the key to her silence. He tried, still in a low voice, to mix Portuguese and Italian. "Sing, Mama." Linda swallowed, lightly touched his hand and replied, "I'll sing for you whenever I need to." At that moment, an intimacy was born between the two, a secret language that only they shared. But as that bond strengthened, Linda felt the weight of the shadow that lurked beyond the closed door. Margaret, the housekeeper, would soon realize that something was changing. And Richard, the father, if he already suspected her influence, could at any moment demand explanations that she was not ready to give. Linda's heart was filled with hope, but her mind whispered in alert. How long would this fragile connection last before someone tried to destroy her? The walls of the Whitmore mansion had never seemed so narrow to Linda as in those days following Michael's first breakthrough. Each morning, as she walked through the aisles with bucket and cloth, she felt the weight of Margaret's eyes following her steps. The housekeeper had become even stricter, controlling her schedules, supervising her movements, insinuating that her presence was exceeding the limits of a simple maid. But Linda, even in silence, continued, because he knew that the music was opening cracks in the boy's heart, and that behind those cracks there was a whole world waiting to be reconquered. Margaret, however, did not accept losing territory. For years his authority had reigned unchallenged within the mansion. Richard depended on his discipline, the officials feared it, and Michael was his perfect excuse to remain indispensable. Now, a young woman in a simple uniform, without titles and without social position, threatened all this. Margaret watched from afar Michael's every reaction to Linda's songs, and in her mind there was no doubt it had to end. The gala dinner offered the perfect opportunity. The mansion was filled with lights and crystals that Saturday night. Luxury cars paraded through the entrance, and Boston's elite gathered in the halls, toasting business, projects, and alliances. Linda worked discreetly, carrying champagne glasses on silver trays, avoiding the gaze of the guests. But Margaret had already sown the poison. In the low voices, between sips of wine, rumors began to circulate. "It's that young girl, the cleaning lady," murmured a lady with a pearl necklace. "They say she's meddling in the boys' affairs," replied another. "Imagine thinking that singing can replace years of treatment. It is pure opportunism." The words traveled from group to group until Linda began to feel the different looks on her. They were no longer just indifferent looks from those who did not see her, but looks of judgment, of distrust. She cringed, trying to disappear into the crowd, but each tray she carried seemed to leave her more exposed. Margaret took the opportunity to stage her play. He approached a circle of influential guests, and, with the honeyed voice he knew how to use when he wanted to appear benevolent, said, "I've been worried about certain recent attitudes. One of our employees believes that she can heal deep wounds with songs alone. A pity. Mr. Whitmore is weakened, everyone knows, and some people know how to take advantage of it." The words fell like a blade. Linda, who was passing by, heard enough to feel her blood run cold. She tried to keep her head down, but inside her, a deep pain burned. It was as if, in an instant, all the effort, all the courage to sing on those silent afternoons had been turned into a weapon against her. Dinner continued, but Linda could barely breathe. With each step, with each fake smile I felt the humiliation grow. When picking up the dishes from the main table, a guest, without even disguising it, commented aloud, "Poor boy, so vulnerable." And a maid thinking she can replace him with cheap tricks. "What times are these?" Linda pursed her lips, her eyes teary, but didn't answer. She was trained to endure, to be invisible, but inside her something broke. She thought of her sick mother, of her grandmother who had given her those songs, of all the closed doors she had ever faced. And now, once again, she was accused of being what she was not, a profiteer, an opportunist, an impostor. Michael, however, from the top of the stairs, watched in silence. The boy, hidden in the shadow, saw the whispers, saw Linda huddled together, and his little heart felt her pain as if it were his own. But no one listened to him, because no one expected him to speak. Richard, distant, talked to businessmen, not realizing the plot that was unfolding before his eyes. Margaret, satisfied, walked among the guests as queen in her own reign, sure that Linda was about to be discarded. When the night was over, Linda walked through the dark garden with the empty tray against her chest. The lights of the city shone in the background, but for her there were only shadows. At every step, the feeling was the same. I was on the verge of losing everything. He knew that Margaret had planted a trap, and that Richard would soon confront her. His heavy heart asked him in silence, would he have the strength to resist, or would this be just another closed door in his life? Linda climbed the stairs of the mansion that night with heavy steps, her heart still throbbing from the humiliations at dinner. The words he heard echoed like invisible needles: profiteer, opportunist, cheap tricks. For a moment, she thought about packing her things, leaving that house behind and looking for another job, one that would free her from the constant burden of being treated as an imposter. But when she walked through the door of the library, something made her stop. The silence there was different, denser, as if it kept secrets. She began to tidy up the cabinets with mechanical gestures, trying not to think, but a stuck drawer caught her eye. He pushed lightly until the wood gave way, revealing a pile of crumpled papers and forgotten medical folders. Linda frowned, pulling out one of the reports. The name on the header made his heart race. Michael Whitmore. The pages were covered with clinical notes, prescriptions, appointment dates, but something wasn't right. The written dosages were too high for an 8-year-old. Powerful tranquilizers, stabilizers, combinations that, in his memories as a student of music pedagogy, sounded more like anesthesia than treatment. Flipping through the reports, Linda noticed a pattern. Each month, the doses increased, while the original medical recommendations, visible in erased copies at the bottom of the folder, were much more lenient. His body froze. That explained Michael's apathy, the lost eyes, the constant sleepiness. It wasn't just trauma. Someone was keeping that boy in silence artificially. She left the papers on the table, her breathing quickening, her mind boiling. Who would be behind this? The housekeeper, who always placed herself as the boy's guardian. Richard, too distracted to notice, or doctors bought for the convenience of a permanent diagnosis. Linda felt her hands tremble. All her life, she had learned to bow her head in the face of injustice, but at that moment, something inside her rose up. He couldn't abandon Michael. I couldn't let him be suffocated until he lost his entire childhood. He leaned back in his reading chair and let out a long sigh. Her eyes scanned the immense room, the stained glass windows reflecting the moon, and for the first time she realized this house was not only a prison for the boy, but also for her. Both lives were locked in silence, hers for shame, his for medicine. It was time to break away. At that moment, an intimate thought crossed his chest. How many people have not lived like this, trapped by something invisible, without a voice, with no chance to explain themselves? Perhaps those who were listening to his story now knew this tightness. And if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Linda turned her eyes to the reports, now more determined than ever. The pain she carried from New York, the injustice that had marked her, all seemed to fit into a single purpose: to protect that boy. He carefully folded the papers and kept them under his uniform close to his chest, as if protecting a secret that can change destinies. As she left the library, a sound made her stop. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Margaret appeared in the shadows, her gaze cold and suspicious. The housekeeper took a few seconds to speak, but her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Are you still awake?" he asked. "The library doesn't need so much dedication." Linda swallowed, forcing a smile. "I was just finishing organizing the closets," he replied. Margaret narrowed her eyes, assessing her every gesture, as if searching for signs of something hidden. Then he tilted his head slightly and moved on. Linda only breathed when the sound of the heels disappeared on the stairs. Back in his small room at the back of the mansion, he sat up on the bed, unable to sleep. The reports rested on his lap, illuminated by the dim light of the lampshade. Each line was a silent denunciation, each dosage a silent crime against a child who just needed care. Linda closed her eyes, feeling a wave of anger and courage mixed. No matter what came, no matter what Margaret's threats or Richard's blindness, she had decided she would fight for Michael, even if it cost her everything. But a question throbbed in her mind, disturbing and inevitable. How far was Margaret willing to go to protect her hold on that house? The next morning, Linda left the mansion earlier than usual, her heart pounding. The cold of Boston cut her face as she hurried through the streets of Cambridge, clutching to her chest the battered bag where she kept the reports she had found in the library. Inside was a name written down on a piece of paper: Dr. Jonathan Harris, a long-time pediatrician in the Whitmore family. It was his only chance to confirm the truth. The clinic was on a quiet, tree-lined street with red brick buildings that exuded tradition and respect. Linda hesitated in front of the glass door, feeling small and out of place in that environment, but she took a deep breath and entered. The reception reeked of disinfectant mixed with expensive perfume, and the walls displayed framed diplomas. Linda approached the secretary, unsure. "I'd like to talk to Dr. Harris." "It's about Michael Whitmore," he said in a low voice. The woman raised her eyebrows, surprised, but minutes later the door to the office opened. A man with grey hair and a serene look welcomed her. "Come in, please." His voice was firm but welcoming. Sitting at the table, Linda trembled slightly as she took the papers out of her bag. "I work in the Whitmore household, I found that." His words came out shaky. "I need to understand if what I saw here makes sense." The doctor adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the reports. With each page, his expression changed from curiosity to indignation. "That's not right," he murmured, looking up at her. "These are not my prescriptions. The doses are increased by 5-6 times. I would never recommend something like that to Michael." Linda felt her hands sweat. "So it wasn't you?" "Not at all," the doctor replied firmly. "For years I have recommended reducing tranquilizers, applying music therapy, speech stimuli. I have always insisted on this. But Margaret," he sighed deeply, as if carrying an old frustration. "Margaret said Richard didn't authorize it, that she preferred to keep the boy under control. I never had direct access to Mr. Whitmore. She mediated everything. It was as if a dense fog had dissipated before Linda. It wasn't just suspicion. Margaret had falsified reports, manipulated information, and held Michael hostage to medicine he didn't need." Linda's heart tightened. It all made sense now. The prolonged silence, the apathy, the almost invisible resistance that arose whenever the housekeeper was around. "So, did she lie for all these years?" Linda whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes," Harris confirmed. "And from what I see, he lied criminally. This can be classified as medical abuse." Linda took a deep breath, trying to absorb the gravity. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. "Doctor, I need your help. Not just to prove that she did it, but to save Michael." Harris leaned forward, his eyes charged with conviction. "I'm with you." It was about time the truth came out. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the tears threaten to fall. But instead of giving in to fear, he let his courage take over. Because there was something greater than his own pain, the life of a boy who deserved to be free from silence. As she left the clinic, walking through the cold streets of Cambridge, Linda looked up to the cloudy sky. She felt that each step brought her closer to something bigger, something that could change not only Michael's life, but hers as well, and maybe even that of other children who, like him, lived imprisoned by other people's decisions. This is where the heart of the story beats strongest, when a simple woman discovers that she can stand up against powerful lies. And if you've been following all this, know, the most defining moment is yet to come, and it can completely transform what you believe about courage and justice. That night, back at the mansion, Linda hid the new documents in the back of her suitcase, along with memories of her grandmother. She felt different. She was no longer just the invisible cleaning lady. Now he had a mission, a trial and an ally. But as he closed his suitcase, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow, precise. Margaret stopped in front of his door without entering. He just stood there for a few seconds, as if he knew something had changed. Linda held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Did Margaret know anything? How far was the housekeeper willing to go to maintain control? Night was falling heavy on the Whitmore mansion when Linda, carrying a basket of freshly ironed clothes, passed in front of Michael's room and heard a tiny, inconspicuous sound, like glass jars being stirred. Instinct made her stop. He put his ear to the half-open door and held his breath. Inside, Margaret was hunched over the bedside table, organizing the boy's medicines. But it was not a simple tidying. His quick fingers changed labels, mixed liquids in precisely measured doses, as if mastering a secret ritual. Linda turned pale. That confirmed everything Dr. Harris had revealed. Her heart raced, but she didn't back down. He pushed the door firmly and entered. Margaret startled, but soon recomposed her face in a mask of coldness. "What are you doing here?" Linda asked, her voice firm despite the fear that throbbed. "Just by taking care of what I have always taken care of," Margaret replied, without stopping her movements. "You wouldn't understand. These are delicate things." Linda stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the bottles. "These doses are too high. Michael doesn't need that. He needs to breathe, live, speak." Margaret laughed, a short, cruel sound. "And who are you to decide? A cleaning lady in a cheap uniform? Do you think you know more than I do, that I have kept this house standing for 15 years? Linda felt her blood boil, but before she could answer, Margaret came closer, so close that her voice became a venomous whisper. "Listen well, dear. Keep getting into what is none of your business, and I will make sure you are deported before sunrise. Your sick mother? Forget about medicines. It will languish on its own." The words fell on Linda like stones. It was the cruelest wound anyone could touch. His mother's life, sustained with every penny earned there, turned into blackmail currency. For a moment she felt weak, almost defeated. But then he squeezed the cell phone hidden in his uniform pocket. Without Margaret noticing, she had pressed the record button. Every threat, every cold word was being recorded. "You can't go on with this," Linda murmured, her voice breaking. Margaret smiled, that calculated smile of someone who believed she was in control. "I can, and I will, because without me, this boy is nothing but a burden. And without this job, you are nothing but nothing." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Michael slept soundly, oblivious to the battle raging for his life, just steps from his bed. Linda backed away slowly, tucking her phone to her chest, as if it were the only weapon she had. Her eyes burned with anger and tears, but deep down, a certainty grew. Now she had the proof she needed. However, a dark question pulsed in her mind. When Margaret discovers that she is no longer the only one keeping secrets, how far will she be able to go? Dawn in Boston brought a biting cold, but inside the Whitmore mansion, the tension was colder than the wind outside. Linda went downstairs, holding tight the folder where she kept the photos of the doctored prescriptions and the recording of Margaret's threat. His heart pounded in his chest. At every step she remembered Michael's frail face, asleep under the weight of medicine he should never have taken. When he arrived in front of Richard's office door, he took a deep breath before knocking. He greeted her with a tired look, sitting behind the large mahogany table, surrounded by business papers. "What's up now, Linda?" he asked, not hiding his impatience. "I don't have time for employee dramas." She approached, opening the briefcase with trembling hands. "Mr. Whitmore, this is not drama. It's about Michael." He placed the photos on the table. "These prescriptions are not the ones Dr. Harris wrote. They are adulterated copies. His son has been doped for years." Richard picked up one of the pages, frowning. "What are you insinuating? That Margaret would falsify medical reports? She's been with me since before Michael was born. It's like family." "I'm not implying," Linda replied firmly. "I saw it. I caught her changing the bottles in his room myself." He swallowed. And I recorded what she said. For a moment, silence took over the room. Richard looked at her as if looking for some lie hidden in her eyes. When Linda showed her cell phone and played the recording, Margaret's voice echoed through the room. "Keep getting into what is none of your business, and I will make sure you get deported. Your sick mother will never have treatment." Richard's face hardened, anger growing like a contained flame. He pushed the chair back, standing up abruptly. "My God," he murmured, running his hand through his hair. "All this time, trusting her." The voice cracked. "And my son being poisoned under my own roof." Linda felt the weight of tears rise in her eyes, but she remained firm. "Dr. Harris can confirm everything. He tried to warn him, but Margaret never let his recommendations get to the Lord. She said that it was the Master's will that the boy remain sedated." Richard punched the table, the sound echoing loudly. "Damn you!" he roared. But soon anger gave way to fear, and he stared at Linda. "If that's true, if it comes to light, the Whitmore's name will be swept away by the mud. The press, the partners, the councils. I cannot allow a scandal of this size." Linda approached, her voice charged with pain. "With all due respect, sir, this is not about your family's reputation. It's about Michael. He doesn't need any more silence. He needs you." The words cut deep. Richard looked away, as if he couldn't bear to face his own guilt. He walked to the window, looking out over the ice-covered gardens. "I need to confirm this before acting." His voice was lower now, almost a whisper. "If Margaret really did that, I swear I will not forgive her. But until then, I don't want to make a fuss. I don't want journalists sniffing doors." Linda stepped forward, her hands clasped in supplication. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, listen to Dr. Harris. He is the only reliable witness. Only then will you see what I have already seen." Richard remained silent for long seconds, as if fighting his own ghosts. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Bring him to me, but no one else should know that, until I confirm every detail." He turned to Linda, his eyes heavy. "And if I find out you're trying to manipulate me, there will be no room for you in any house in this city." Linda lowered her head in respect. But inside her the decision was already made. I would take all the risks. I would face all the threats, because I could no longer turn back. The boy had found in her the hope he had lost, and now it was her turn to fight for him. As he left the office, he felt the weight of the approaching battle. Richard was torn between truth and fear, between love for his son and the need to protect the Whitmore surname. And in this abyss of uncertainty, Linda wondered, how long would he be able to keep silent before the truth exploded before everyone? Afternoon was falling over the Whitmore mansion with a heavy silence, when Margaret's cry echoed down the main hallway. "Call Mr. Whitmore now!" His voice was tinged with triumph, as if announcing a long-awaited victory. Linda, who had just left the library with a still damp cloth in her hands, felt her stomach tighten. Soon after, 2 employees appeared, bringing a small, open velvet box, inside which a necklace of pearls gleamed. "We found this in the cleaning lady's room," said Margaret theatrically, holding up the object as evidence. "A gift from Mrs. Whitmore, who has been missing for months." I always knew there was something wrong. Linda was paralyzed, unable to believe it. "That's a lie," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I've never touched anything in this house." "Oh, of course," Margaret replied, crossing her arms. "All thieves say the same." Richard went down the stairs quickly, his expression confused. "What's going on here?" Margaret ran to him, showing him the jewel. "Mr. Whitmore, I am deeply sorry, but I found this in her room. It's no coincidence. This woman has been manipulating her son, making up stories, and now reveals herself for what she really is, a profiteer." Linda tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out by the hubbub of the employees. Shame burned like fire in his chest. She looked up at Richard, pleading, "Please, I would never do that. Someone put it there. I just want the best for Michael." At that moment, something unexpected happened. From the top of the stairs, Michael emerged in his wheelchair, his eyes fixed, his breathing quick. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with an effort that seemed to break the silence of years, he spoke in a clear voice. "She is my friend." The whole hall stopped. The glasses in the hands of the guests faltered, and it took Richard a second to understand what he had heard. "Michael, did you say it?" he murmured, incredulous. "She is my friend," the boy repeated, even more firmly, pointing to Linda. "She helps me." Those words, simple and pure, pierced the room like lightning. Linda's heart raced. Tears welled up without her being able to contain it. It was the first time I had heard his voice in English, the first time everyone had testified that it was not a trick, but a real one. Richard staggered a few steps, touching his forehead as if he needed to confirm that he wasn't dreaming. He turned slowly to Margaret, and the weight of betrayal fell upon him with a silent fury. "You dared to manipulate my son, to lie to me, to poison this house with falsehoods," he said, his voice firm, full of indignation. Margaret tried to react, her eyes wide. "I just wanted to protect." But Richard raised his hand, cutting off any defense. "Protection? You almost destroyed what was left of my family. Grab your things and leave this house now." The employees recoiled, shocked. Margaret, for the first time, lost her posture. His face, wrinkled with pride, crumbled in despair, but no one reached out. It was withdrawn, the heavy footsteps echoing like an inevitable end. Linda remained motionless, feeling torn between relief and fear. He knew that the battle was not yet over, but in that instant, in front of everyone, Michael had broken the chains of silence. Richard approached her slowly, his gaze confused, moved, and asked in a choked voice, How did he achieve this with you?" And deep in Linda's soul, a certainty shone through. If the boy had had the courage to speak for her, the fight was just beginning. But what other truths still needed to be revealed? Margaret left the Whitmore mansion red-hot, but her silence was no surrender. The defeat before Richard and Linda's unexpected triumph hurt more than any public humiliation. It was the end of her reign within the house she had ruled for years as sovereign. However, as the gates closed behind her, she was already plotting her revenge. If he had lost power within the walls, he would strike from outside, where one's honor and name could be destroyed in a few printed lines. 2 days later, Boston newspapers began circulating with discreet but poisonous headlines. "Young woman embroiled in New York education scandal now works for city billionaire." The article described in a distorted way the accident at the community school where Linda had taught music. Anonymous reports said that her recklessness had caused trauma in special children, and that she had been removed due to disability. Nothing about the budget cuts, nothing about the pressure from influential parents who had demanded his departure, only the convenient version, that of a woman marked by mistakes, dangerous in any environment. Linda found the folded newspaper in the kitchen of the mansion. As he read his own name printed in small print, his heart cringed. His hands trembled as he ran through the sentences, each word weighing like a sentence. She knew Margaret was behind it. He sat at the table, his breath short, the memories of the past coming back with force. The school hallways, the accusatory voices, the moment when he had seen his career come crashing down for something he didn't control. Now, all over again. The employees murmured among themselves. Some looked at her suspiciously, as if suddenly that woman who had given the boy her voice back was a hidden threat. Richard read the article in silence, without issuing judgment, but the mere fact of not defending it immediately was like a blade in his heart. Linda felt the weight of loneliness once again. That night, locked in her small room, she hugged the suitcase where she kept the medical reports and the recording of Margaret's threat. She thought about giving up, about leaving before the shame was greater, before the whole city judged her for a lie repeated as truth. But then he heard a faint sound at the door. 3 shy knocks. When she opened it, she found Michael with moist eyes. The wheelchair pushed with effort. He didn't say much, just whispered, in his mixture of broken English and childish accent, "Don't go." Linda fell to her knees before him, holding his small hands. Those 2 words were like a cry of courage. I couldn't abandon it, not now. She looked at him, her heart on fire, and realized that Margaret could spread all the lies in the world, but there was one truth that no one could take away. Michael had spoken again because he trusted her. And this is where life shows its hardest face. Sometimes, when we start to raise our heads, the world tries to crush us even more. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Over the next few days, Margaret stepped up her campaign. He paid sensationalist journalists, fed gossip columns, planted doubts, even among Richard's closest friends. Linda's past was explored mercilessly, described as a character flaw. The conversations in the halls of Boston were no longer just about business, but about the troubled cleaner who had mysteriously gained a place in the Whitmores' lives. Linda walked the halls of the mansion with her head held high, but inside she carried the fear that the whole world would collapse on her. And in the midst of this weight, a question tormented her night and day. How far would Margaret be willing to go to bury her for good? The Manhattan Gala Hall was lit up as if it were the stage for a grandiose play. Crystal chandeliers reflected in the wine glasses, and the voices of the political and financial elite echoed in conversations that mixed business and ostentation. Richard Whitmore, host of the evening, walked among the guests with his posture upright, trying to hide the restlessness that burned inside him. For him, that night would be a watershed, a charity event to raise the family's image, but also a silent test for the truth that still pulsated as a secret. Beautiful, discreet in a simple dress that contrasted with the luxury around her, she remained close to Michael. The boy, with attentive eyes, seemed to feel the weight of the night. Ambient music filled the spaces, but behind the melody there was tension. It was then that the sound of Margaret's heels cut through the room. The housekeeper, who had been removed weeks before, appeared with an elegant fury, as if she were ready for a show. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his firm voice drawing everyone's attention, "I'm sorry to interrupt this noble meeting, but there's something you need to know. This woman," he pointed to Linda, "is not who she seems to be. An imposter, a charlatan who has already destroyed lives in New York. An irresponsible woman who almost led to the death of children and now hides behind a uniform to manipulate a vulnerable boy." A murmur ran through the hall. Some guests looked at each other. Others were already preparing cell phones to record. Richard raised his hand, but Margaret continued, excited. "Tonight, before all of you, I ask you to open your eyes. She is not the heroine she appears to be. It's a fraud." Linda felt her heart race, but she didn't back down. He walked to the center of the room, his gaze steady, despite the throbbing fear. "If I may, Mr. Whitmore," he said in a clear voice, and then turned to the audience. "If you allow me, all of you, I have something to show." Richard hesitated, but saw in Linda's eyes the certainty he lacked. He made a gesture, and within seconds a projector was turned on. The lights dimmed, and documents began to appear on the walls of the hall. Doctored prescriptions, forged signatures, Dr. Harris's original report side by side with the manipulated copies. The doctor himself, present that night, stood up and declared, "These are my prescriptions. For years, I recommended minimal doses and music therapy, but everything was hidden, manipulated, falsified. This boy was not silent because of his trauma alone, but because he was poisoned by the excess of medicines." The buzz became a collective shock. Margaret turned pale, trying to intervene. "Lie! This is a setup!" he shouted, but his voice sounded empty in the face of the force of the projected facts. It was then that Michael, in the middle of the room, raised his head. His still, frail body in the wheelchair seemed to carry the strength of a giant. He looked at the audience, at his father, at Linda, and began to sing. The melody in Italian, inherited from Linda's grandmother, filled the space with a purity that made every conversation fall silent, every gaze fixed. Those ancient words, charged with love and hope, pierced the crystal walls and reached hearts that had long forgotten how to be moved. Some guests put their hands to their mouths. Discreet tears flowed. The silence that followed was the most eloquent of all, the living, irrefutable proof that there was no charlatanism. There was truth, there was healing, there was music. Linda, with tears in her eyes, stood next to Michael, holding his hand, and in his mind echoed an intimate thought that seemed to cross those who watched as well. Life can push us to the ground. It can mark us with injustices, but when the truth finally finds its voice, nothing can silence it. And if you're listening to this story right now, know it. The most memorable moment is yet to come. Richard, visibly shaken, looked at Margaret with suppressed fury, but the hall, still in absolute silence, seemed to be waiting for a decision. What would happen now that everyone had seen the truth laid out before their eyes? The hall remained silent for a few seconds, the weight of Michael's song still hanging in the air as if sacred. The last notes in Italian seemed to vibrate in the crystals of the chandeliers and in the heart of each person present there. Then, suddenly, the sound of the cameras overlapped. Incessant flashes, journalists rushing to capture the scene, microphones raised toward Richard, Linda, Michael. Margaret, however, was motionless, like a broken statue at the center of the scandal. Their eyes ran from one side to the other, looking for support, but they found only indignant faces, some even disgusted. "This is a conspiracy!" he shouted, his voice already without the authority he had before. "I did everything for his sake." His desperate attempt echoed in the hall, but now no one believed him. The projection of the document still stamped the walls, the records of Dr. Harris and the recording of the threat exposed each lie. Margaret stood naked before the world, stripped of her robe of power. Richard, with heavy breathing, advanced towards her. His gaze was that of a man who had discovered years of blindness in a single night. "You didn't take care of my son," he said, in a deep and firm voice. "You imprisoned him. You didn't protect this house, you poisoned it." He gestured, and two security guards approached, taking Margaret by the arms. She tried to resist, struggled, cried out for mercy, but her struggle was pathetic in the face of the evidence. The flashes followed her like vultures on a carcass, recording the fall of a woman who, for so long, she believed to be untouchable. On the opposite side, Linda stood next to Michael, holding his hand as if holding a promise. Richard turned to her, still shaken, but with something new in his voice. "Respect. I owe you my son's life," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. "And from this moment on, no one will dare to treat you as less than you are." The phrase fell as a sentence and liberation. The hall applauded, first timidly, then strongly, until the sound became deafening. Journalists took notes, recorded them, broadcast them live. The next day, that scene would be printed in newspapers from Boston to New York. Cleaning lady gives voice back to Heir Whitmore and overthrows historic governess. Margaret was escorted out to boos and scornful looks. His name, once respected among the elite, now carried the weight of public shame. The news spread quickly. Companies dismissed her from advice. Invitations were withdrawn. Doors closed. The woman who for years had controlled the lives of others now had nowhere to hide. Linda, on the contrary, came to be seen in a different way. The same one who was once invisible, who passed through the corridors like a shadow, was now called the voice of hope, the woman who did the impossible. But inside her there was no vanity. There was only immense relief and the certainty that he had done what needed to be done. Michael, still emotional, did not let go of her. His eyes, full of life, said more than any speech. He had found in Linda something that the whole world, with all its wealth, had not given him, someone who truly saw him. And in that whirlwind of applause and cameras, Linda had an intimate thought, almost like a whisper to herself. Sometimes justice delays, sometimes the world seems to crush the small, but when the truth meets the light, no power can stop it. The salon returned to the dinner routine, but nothing was the same anymore. Margaret's reputation shattered in real time, while Linda's figure grew in dignity and truth before the eyes of all. Still, even amidst applause, a shadow remained in the protagonist's heart. After such a humiliating fall, what revenge could be born from Margaret's despair? The days following the scandal in Manhattan transformed the Whitmore mansion in almost unrecognizable fashion. The heavy silence that once dominated the hallways was replaced by soft sounds, piano notes, children's voices, suppressed laughter that echoed through the walls. Linda, still wearing the simple cleaning uniform, now also carried a sheet music folder under her arm. She was no longer just an invisible employee. She had become the bridge between the pain and hope of that house. Michael, now more awake, spent hours by her side. Each morning, his little hands explored the keyboard of the library piano, missing notes, smiling when he got it right, asking for patience in hesitant English. Linda, by his side, taught calmly, mixing Italian and Portuguese as if the languages were in an intimate territory, only theirs. The songs that had once been whispered secrets now filled the entire house, as if each chord cleaned an old wound. Richard watched from afar, often standing in the library doorway, teary-eyed. He, who had spent years lost between business and commitments, now discovered a new type of wealth, seeing his son smile. One afternoon, he called Linda to the office. On the table, there were no contracts or figures, but a simple sheet with some notes. "I want you to help me create something bigger," he said. "If music brought Michael back, maybe it can reach other children. This home has room to spare. Let's turn some halls into a community musical school." Linda was silent for a moment, her heart sinking. "I didn't expect so much, I didn't dream big." But the proposal was loaded with truth. "I'm not a renowned teacher," she murmured. "I don't have diplomas recognized by the big universities. But there's something that no institution teaches," Richard interrupted firmly. "You have faith. You believe in what you touch. That's what gave my son back." And so, little by little, the musical program inside the mansion was born. Children from the Boston community began arriving in small, shy groups, many of them without access to art classes in their schools. Linda greeted them with her soft voice, arranged the piano, distributed sheet music, and improvised simple instruments. The hall, once used for gala dinners, was now occupied by small violins, plastic flutes, children's voices singing out of tune, but full of life. Michael became an active part of this new home. Alongside other children, he laughed, risked complete sentences in English, and on the sunniest afternoons, even ventured to sing in front of the group. The boy, who had not previously uttered a word, now led songs in chorus, as if each melody were a piece recovered from the mother he had lost. For Linda, those days were like being reborn. The weight of the shame of the past was beginning to dissipate. He no longer needed to hide or silence his talent as a penance. As I taught each child, I felt that I was also healing my own wound. It was as if the music, which was once taken from her, had found a new home in her. One night after the children left, Linda was alone in the library, softly playing the lullaby in Italian. The melody rose like prayer. Richard walked in slowly, stood next to her, and said, "You gave not only Michael his life back, but me as well. I'll never know how to thank you." Linda smiled slightly, without looking up from the keyboard. "You don't need to thank you. It is enough that he never again let silence take over this house." Outside, snow was beginning to cover the gardens. Inside, however, there was heat. The Whitmore mansion, once marked by mourning and silence, now breathed music, friendship, and a new purpose. It was as if each chord had redrawn its walls, transforming a palace of pain into a haven of hope. And as Linda closed the piano that night, a different feeling took hold of her heart. Perhaps, for the first time, she wasn't just passing through the lives of others. Perhaps he had found, in that unlikely place, his own home. But fate, always unpredictable, still held a last revelation capable of forever changing everything she believed she had achieved. I went into that house just to clean windows, but I found a boy trapped in silence and a father lost in his own guilt. Today, when I see them smiling again, I feel that my grandmother was right when she said that music is not just sound, it is a bridge between souls. Michael sings, studies, laughs, and in each note of his, I also find the voice that I once thought I had lost forever. Justice was served. Margaret reaped the weight of her choices, and I could finally breathe without fear, with the dignity I had always carried hidden. This story taught me that courage is born in silence, that forgiveness and faith can rebuild lives, and that even the most invisible hands are capable of transforming destinies. And if this journey has touched your heart, I thank you for staying with me this far. Your presence is what gives meaning to every word. Your like is like a hug that warms and sustains this channel. The subscription is like an invitation to meet again at the next cafe. And I would love to know which city you are watching from, so that we can create a community of stories and affection together. Also, activate the bell so you don't lose when the coffee is ironed again. Because there are still many other stories of cleaners, kept in silence, waiting to be heard. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.